All right, guys, let's wrap up chapter 1 as I try to look at the camera to make sure I'm looking at you and not be too creepy. We're going to wrap up chapter 1. So I gave you an introduction to this profession, why we exist, right? How we exist. I talked about the frameworks we do. How do we embark on our jobs day after day? And really, I want to wrap chapter up by making it clear why we matter. This is very important. Write this down. Theo, write this down. Pay attention, Theo. Theo, you with us? All right? Really, what public relations, you'll also hear me say things like communications or strategic comms. Technically, they're all a little different, but in our purposes, in our class, for simplicity, they're the same. Really, my job as the communications manager for the city of Elkins, when I worked in the private sector for big companies or large PR firms, really what my job is I am management's interpreter, right? I am translating for city council and the city clerk to our residents and citizens what the city is doing and why we're doing it, right? I'm taking that information from management and I am literally translating it so the public understands what's going on, all right? Because if you're at a company, and we talked about this, not everybody understands finance jargon. Not everybody understands marketing jargon. Not everybody understands engineering or design jargon. So one way or another, any large, credible organization, it doesn't necessarily have to be large. Smaller organizations have it too. They may just not have a dedicated person. Any organization, one way or another, needs a public relations or communications function, right? Because you're going to have to tell the public and your publics. What is publics? Another word for Luke number 1. Don't fall asleep. What's the other word for publics? In academia, they say publics. What are we? Yes, stakeholders. That's what we are. So we are interpreting a company's philosophy or a mission or a nonprofit's mission. We're explaining policies. We're explaining various programs, products, practices that management's undergoing, right? And also at the same time, it's not just us telling what management's doing. Part of my job, whether it's where I am now with the city of Elkins or when I worked for a company, it's literally listening out there what the public is saying about us so I can turn around and explain to management what's going on. What are people saying about us? Hey, you know what? We're doing a great job. People are saying positive things about us. Or it could be, you know what? We suck. People are saying really nasty things about us. So I want to make it clear and make sure you understand this. And yes, I might ask this. This could be a true-false question. It's not just me explaining my organization's position, and I may not have said this or make it clear, but it's clear now while you're freezing in your dorm rooms listening to this. It's also my job to hear what's out there and then explain that to management. Yes, social media has a role in this. So if you look, how this is in action, go to if you use Facebook, go to Elkins City Hall on Facebook. We have a policy not to answer every little comment out there because that's all I'd be able to do day after day. And then, we all know how social media is, right? People start arguing, blah, 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 blah. So we have a policy. If you look, this was my predecessor that did this, and it was a great idea, to be clear, or it may have been the city clerk. I can't remember who did this, but at the end of all of our social media posts on Facebook, we have a disclaimer saying, you know what, we aren't going to be answering every single comment, man. But here's Leon K's work phone number and email. So if you have a concern, contact us. And sometimes people do because something breaks or something doesn't work or somebody's garbage doesn't get picked up. But how I use those comments is that I will see maybe there's a confusion over the policy. Maybe people don't think their garbage is being picked up early enough or what have you. And then what I can do is people have a general question about, when the leaf blower comes. And so I can ask our operations manager saying, hey, you know what? I saw a couple comments on Facebook. Maybe this is a post we need to write, or maybe we need to explain it. Maybe we need to make a change to how the city does things. So, and I have third-party services that actually help me with this. And I will show you in class sometime, but it's not like I'm on Facebook all day looking for comments. I actually have access to a third-party service where someone asks a question, and if somebody says something nasty, I get an email. So then I just see that comment, it's in my inbox, and I can deal with it. So again, just so you understand, yes, this will be a question. It's a two-way mode of communication and interfacing and interacting. I am translating what management is saying to the public. I am listening to the public one way or another and giving that feedback back to management. So make sure, and based on that feedback we might hear, like I do with the city operations manager or the head of the water department, I can recommend action. I don't know what kind of and just to make sure how this works, I can't recommend action or I can't recommend a policy change if I don't know what people are saying, right? Does that make sense? Yes, it makes sense. Alicia and Brandon, this is why you're sitting in the front, because I know you get it. So based on what I hear from the public, I'm in a good position to recommend action to management about something going on somewhere, right? It's backwards, I know you can't read it. But this leads to, who am I listening to? I'm listening to, again, your author calls them publics. What are they called? Stakeholder groups. Large organizations, we talked about Nike the other day, they've got all kinds of stakeholders. Who are stakeholders for the city of Elkins? Luke number 2, what's one of them? Residents? Yep, that's right, residents. We got to communicate with residents. They've got their needs. Luke number 1, you awake? What's another one? Employees? Yes, that's an example of an internal stakeholder group. Yes, employees, people like me. We have our needs and our concerns too. We got to make sure council knows how we feel about certain things going on. All right? Anybody else? Jose, what's another example of a stakeholder group in the city of Elkins? Police officers. Yeah, that's actually really good. It's they're not just employees, all right? Or our first responders, whether they're cops or firefighters. EMS would be first responders as well, but here in Randolph County, the county deals with that. I don't think we have, do I know what I'm doing? Yeah, we don't have EMS staff on, but they're in a special situation, right? They're not like, I'm not putting my life on the line, writing a Facebook post, all right? But our officers do, so they've got a different compensation structure. They've got different benefits. They've got different needs and concerns. So I would say that's an example of stakeholder groups. So residents, employees, first responders, really good. Darby, would you say, Darby? Businesses, yeah, absolutely. All right, our businesses, right? They've got to go through the hoops, sign all these permits and forms so they can conduct business. Maybe they have ideas on how to make it more seamless. All right, maybe there are concerns, whether they're in downtown Elkins or whether they're in the industrial park in South Elkins, right? They've got their concerns as well. What's another one? Lindsay, did I hear you? Yeah, nonprofits. Yeah, sure, community organizations. So that's a few right there. If you think of others, this is how I know you're going to be attention, because you can email me and say, hey, Mr. K, while you're yelling at us and pretending to be us, which is like so cringe, you missed this group. All right, but I think I gave you a few examples of stakeholder groups for the city of Elkins, right? Residents, employees, first responders, businesses, community groups, all right? It could be visitors. We are a focal point where several highways spoke out from here. That probably wasn't the best phrasing, but you've seen the signs with different highway numbers. All right, so visitors, that could be a stakeholder group as well. Oh my God, you guys are so smart. You guys are so smart. I drop an F-bomb to say how happy I am, but then I'd have to start all over, and that is not good. So let's get to the nitty gritty, all right? Let's get a little academic here. Sorry. So how we can define a stakeholder group, all right, is that It's a group of people or a group of organizations that face a very similar indeterminate situation. And when I say indeterminate, it's not fixed. Stakeholder groups, their needs, they can evolve over time, all right? So that's why we need to listen to each one individually. Large organizations, their communications or PR function is probably designed, in fact, where different people focus on different stakeholder groups' needs. So for example, I think I mentioned this. If you're good with numbers, if you're confident speaking on calls or even having to talk to media, if you are fascinated by the stock market and know a lot about securities and equities, or you want to learn investor relations, that's arguably a subset of public relations. You will see investor relations jobs all over the internet at companies, all right? So their job is to understand what could be good or problematic for investors in any given situation, right? Just how for a brand or a manufacturer or a company that makes stuff, their customers are an important stakeholder groups. Customers have different needs from investors, just like how investors have different needs from employees, right? These days, things are getting so crazy, you could probably say influencers are stakeholder groups, especially for very prominent brands, right? And so we have to be attuned to different stakeholder groups' needs, because stakeholders will organize if they're facing a problem and they're finding the organization isn't doing anything about it. So business owners here in Elkins, they have their concerns. Residents, they have their concerns. The first responders, yes, they have their concerns. So does that make sense? So just to repeat this, write this down, Caitlin, right? Stakeholder groups, they're facing a similar indeterminate situation. They're not, it means it's not fixed. It's not set in concrete. They can evolve over time. They can see what could be problematic, and they will organize if they're not being heard, right? So I hope this makes sense. If nothing makes sense, oh, by the way, please like these videos and subscribe. Hit that subscribe button wherever it is. They're probably not going to allow me to have a subscribe button. But anyhow, that gets me into, let's talk about stakeholders a little more. Actually, do we need to get into the weeds? I don't think, we really don't. I think it's going to get too academic. But just understand that we can classify them simply into internal and external stakeholder groups. So let's get back to the city of Elkins because I want to make sure you understand this. All right. What would be in internal stakeholder groups? Theo, you're so smart. Yes, that is correct. Employees, civil service folks like me. What's another example of an internal stakeholder group, Ava? Oh my God, you're so smart. Yes, first responders. Who are examples of external stakeholder groups? Is anybody paying attention? Darby? I saw you raise your hand. Yes! Residents. That's one group. Another example of external stakeholders. Who are they? Business owners. Yes. Or another one, which you all yelled out at the same time. Yes, community groups. So for example, nonprofits that are helping the homeless, or nonprofits that are putting together activities for kids like the YMCA. That's another example of a community group. So just understand, I think all we need to know for this class is understand that there are internal and external stakeholder groups, and large sophisticated organizations, they will have employees that maybe just focus on internal stakeholders versus external stakeholders. So what does all this mean? Just to make it clear, there's a long list in your book, I believe. I don't want to make this run too long, so I want to search for the page number, but what kind of skills do you need? Obviously, writing. The PR person is the best writer in the organization, usually, right? But it's not just writing. Media relations, maintaining those relationships with media, pitching them, responding to them if there's a concern with an article. There's the social media aspect. Planning is a big part of my job, but also remember counseling, right? Something happens within the city It's an issue that affects the city clerk, it affects the mayor, it affects council. I can give my recommendations to them. It's also a lot of research, right? Publicity, as in having events, right? If I were in a private organization or a public company, marketing communications, there are all kinds of community relations. There's consumer relations, customer relations, employee relations. I mentioned investor relations, right? Public affairs. So really my job is more falls in the public affairs because I communicate not only with the general public, but I may need to communicate with officials who are at the county, state, maybe even the federal level. And then crisis communications, which is coming on later in the semester. Now, as we wrap up, there's one thing that I need you to know. Public relations is not spin. So when you write this down, you should be writing public relations =/ as a not equals spin. There's a reputation that we are spin doctors. A lot of this dates back from the Clinton administration in the 90s. In fact, you never really heard spin. His administration was notorious for spin. But spin is when you're interpreting an issue so you're trying to sway public opinion. All right? You're trying to put a positive spin on a negative story. That doesn't work. Right? That's when you cross that line and you're distorting, you're confusing, obfuscating the issue, or just outright lying. We don't lie, right? That is not our job. It is our job, however, to present the point of view of the organization. Presenting the point of view of the organization is very different from lying, right? There are two things. Some of these you will hear on Scandal. That it's a great show that was on ABC. I think it's on Netflix now. I don't know if it necessarily did a great job portraying the PR industry, but it gives you an idea of how things work, although of course it's exaggerated. There are two cardinal rules in public relations, in my opinion, and you need to know this. Write this down, Aries. Write these out. I can almost guarantee I'm going to ask something. Two cardinal rules. 1, never ever lie. Don't lie. 2, do no harm. Do no harm. Never lie. Never do any harm. And with that, I think that wraps up chapter 1. All right, chapter 2 is coming soon. Hit that subscribe button. And again, if you have any questions, don't put it in the comments because I'm going to turn those off once I get these uploaded. Email me. That's how I'm going to know if you've been paying attention, because that's how I'm going to take attendance. All right, signing off for now. Another costume change coming soon.